Well, hello, men, and welcome to Messages for Men. This is a podcast designed for men, about men, on how we can get better, feel better, and do better, quite frankly. Topic today is going to be about chasing dopamine. This is something that a lot of men get involved in, and we got to get ourselves off this carousel. Let me explain why and how. Well, first of all, dopamine is not a drug. Dopamine is a hormone that's naturally produced. It's a pretty phenomenal hormone then when you take a look at this molecule, this neurotransmitter, sometimes a neuromodulator, does some really unique things in our systems. It's responsible for pleasure. It's responsible for cravings. It's responsible for motivation and getting things done. It's responsible for clarity of thought. And there's another pathway in dopamine that's responsible for movement. And that's where Parkinson's disease comes in when you have trouble with Parkinson's and movement. So how do our ancestors, when you take a look at it, what are Homo sapiens? How are we supposed to function with dopamine in the right amount, in the right ways? Well, take a look at it like this. 10,000 years ago, when man was cold, he'd want fire for warmth. What motivated him to do this? Dopamine. When he was hungry, maybe he would go out and hunt. And the hunting process generated dopamine, just the process itself, because a lot of men enjoyed it. Dopamine. Getting fed. How did you feel? Dopamine. When you're thirsty and you're motivated to drink, dopamine. So a lot of what dopamine was originally designed for are motivation to get us to move, to act, and become, and also derive satisfaction from it. That's historically how our ancestors and the way the Homo sapien was designed to utilize dopamine. But what do we do today? Let's take a look at it. Let's take, for example, Phil. Phil's 32 years old. Lives in the basement of his parents' home. He's a graphic artist who doesn't really like his job because he gets involved in too much graphic design on a production level, and there's not allowed to use his creativity. So he's pretty disgruntled. He's unmotivated, doesn't like his job, doesn't want to go to his job, kind of at a dead end and not sure where to go. Really unmotivated. Now remember, the mind is a beautiful thing, and it tries to achieve homeostasis. So when you don't feel good, your mind tries to create neurohormones, for example, that might help you feel better, maybe in the form of dopamine, serotonin. For example, those are two of them. But what happens when we get involved in increasing or hijacking dopamine in an artificial way? Let me talk about it for a second. So Phil's not feeling very good about himself. It's a Friday night, and he decides he's going to stay in the basement of his home, and he's going to play video games for several hours. Why? Ding, ding, ding. This provides some dopamine. He gets a dopamine hit. Along the way, he's looking through Amazon and he decides to purchase some other games and do some other things. The purchasing process, ding, 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 get some more dopamine. And along the way, maybe he drinks 3 or 4 beers. Alcohol is sedative, granted, but there's also dopamine release when you drink alcohol in the mind. It produces more dopamine, ding, ding, ding. And maybe he, smokes a joint or two. And even though you're looking at the cannabinoid system, you can still derive dopamine from that, and you get ding, 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 more dopamine. And maybe before the evening concludes, he decides to indulge in some adult content, some pornography. Why would he do this? Well, pornography generates in some regards, a tremendous amount of dopamine. Ding, ding, ding. So what happens is, looking at Phil, he's layering upon layer upon layer upon layer of dopamine in an artificial way. This is not the way that man was designed. So he gets a huge bolus, just a tremendous amount of flood of dopamine that hits and hits hard, and he feels really good. This is kind of how illicit drugs like cocaine, methamphetamines, and amphetamine work. You get a really strong surge of euphoria and pleasure, and you feel really good about it. But here's the problem, men, that we need to understand, is it bottoms out very quickly, and it goes below your normal baseline in terms of what your dopamine level is, and it troughs out at a point and lasts for an extended period of time at a point where you just don't feel good about yourself. You may get to the point where you feel depressed and anxious. You may have mood disorders. You lack confidence. You lack self-esteem and all the things. Maybe guilt and shame's involved in all of this. But it can be a struggle to get off this carousel, because what do? The longer the trough lasts in this feeling that we're not feeling good, what do we seek? We reach back in maybe and we view more pornography. More novelty pornography, more intense pornography, that try to increase and elevate that same level of pleasure we achieved before. But the problem is there's not as much circulating dopamine, so you can't quite get there. And so you seek more and more and more of things that you attempt to get there with. But the problem, once again, is it troughs again. But this time it troughs at even lower than it was before. It may even lower your baseline dopamine and last even longer and longer and longer. This is why men struggle with, some cases, addiction. This is why men can struggle with all sorts of mood disorders. Because in this moment of feeling low dopamine, it's hard to be motivated. It's hard to find self-esteem. It's hard to feel good about who you are and what you are. It's hard to feel good about anything. And we do this at the expense of a 15 to 20 minute high ride of dopamine along the way. It's not worth it. Let me explain to you kind of how dopamine is supposed to work and what is worth it. Well, how do we get dopamine? Well, first of all, we got to go back to the pillars of health, whether you want to hear it or not. It really is true. Sleep, exercise, and nutrition. Why? Why is this so important? Well, when you look at sleep and good sleep hygiene, for example, 7 to 9 hours, really the mind goes through a rebuilding process, a reorganization process during sleep, and it helps you build the foundation for your neurohormonal system. It helps us regulate hormones when we sleep. So we have more of it. So now think about this. Think about Phil, who consumed too much alcohol and too much marijuana before he went to bed. Well, he's going to have sleep fragmentation from the alcohol, and his REM sleep is affected by marijuana. So is he going to get a good night's sleep? No. And this will affect his dopamine levels. So the following day when he wakes up, when you're supposed to have the most abundant, it's probably the largest portion of dopamine throughout the course of the day, and it kind of weans off as the day goes on. What happens? You don't have, and you don't start out with the amount of dopamine you traditionally needed in the mornings to get going with. So what do we do again? We seek activities. Maybe we're supposed to be on social media for 20 minutes. We spend 2 hours. We waste 2 hours because ding, 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 and the algorithms are so smart that they keep us there, and they want to keep us there, and we love the dopamine hits from getting there. But how do we do it in a way that's productive? Well, I just talked about nutrition, exercise, and sleep. So how does exercise do it? We get an endorphin release from exercise. We know that. But there's also a dopamine release as well. And some exercise provide more dopamine than others, granted. But we do get it. We also get it from nutrition. We know, for example, that eating a well-balanced meal with plenty of protein, that produces amino acids. Amino acids are really crucial in the development of dopamine. So nutrition is important. When we eat a lot of crap, we may get a dopamine spike from that. Eat tons of chocolate, you're going to get a dopamine spike. But once again, you also have a fallout period where you feel low because of it. So nutrition is an important part of this as well. But what else can we do besides exercise, nutrition, and good sleep? And those are really the paramount, really the essential, crucial things in good health. Well, I'm here to say that try to get involved in activities that you find pleasurable. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you love to play chess, then play chess. I mean, sometimes you get dopamine hits even thinking about playing chess. It's not only playing chess or whether you win or lose, it's the process. You love playing pickup basketball, play pickup basketball. You love golf, play some golf. Enjoy it. Because what you want to avoid is artificial stimulation of dopamine and the layering upon layer upon layer of dopamine that increases dopamine to the point where you're going to crash and burn out. What other things increase dopamine? Well, I know sunshine does in the reticular system. You can increase dopamine through that. There is some great science surrounding cold plunging and cold showers. That has a tremendous benefit to dopamine, and it lasts and sustains itself hour after hour after hour. Because remember what basically producing dopamine through technology does. It spikes it, troughs it, and then the trough lasts for way too long. Whereas naturally, you're going to increase dopamine, but that dopamine response will last potentially hour after hour that you feel good. So find things that you find pleasurable. Let me give you another example. Even in business, when I would think about how do I build business and how is going to grow, just the thinking process made me excited, motivated, and that derived dopamine from that. And even in the grind, even when I had to lean in and even the frustration and all that went through trying to grow business, I did get dopamine from that. And the outcome, I got dopamine again. This is a natural way we build dopamine. If we do it unnaturally, it can lead to health consequences. It can lead to mental issues. So let's take some time right now to think about ways in which we can build dopamine and utilize dopamine and not layer dopamine artificially. And if you're doing things that we derive dopamine from in really artificial ways that aren't productive, let's try to stop for 30 days, whether it's alcohol, marijuana, whether it's too much gaming, whether it's too much pornography or whatever. Try to cut it out for 30 days. If you do this, you kind of re-regulate your neurohormonal system, so to speak. You kind of reboot yourself. And there is such a thing as a science of neuroplasticity, where you build other pathways and learn to understand what brings you pleasure and how to get pleasure out of activities you're doing and how to crave those pleasures and get motivated by those pleasures. Once we do that, we can get motivated to move forward and become the men we really want to be. And really the men we deserve to be. But we've got to get off this cycle. We've got to get off the carousel of dopamine and chasing dopamine. Remember, activities and doing things derives dopamine. It helps you get there. So men, get involved in activities that bring you pleasure and joy and happiness. Because isn't that what life is really about? Men, take care. I wish you all well and have a great day.